Wir eine Kandensie ist.
Okay, so go ahead. Go ahead, Fatima.
Okay. So here in Brazil, in our lab, we work with the defensive system, and especially using photographs of aversive stimuli. And the most used stimuli we use is mutilated bodies, but we also use a picture of violence that of people pointing guns to the participants and so on and so forth. And we use peripheral measures like heart rate and skin conductance and posturography to investigate the body reactivity, and also the electroencephalogram and functional neuroimaging. So we started.
Do you refer to fMRI, or is it okay?
It's fMRI, yeah. And we have a collaboration with people from the Psychiatry Institute in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. So there we study people with post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know if you're familiar with this condition.
Yeah.
Okay. So we perform like studies using psychometry and also the biological measures with brain imaging and peripheral measures. Stefanella, I will share my screen, okay?
Yes, you can share.
Okay. So if you need to talk, well, I won't be able to see you, so if you want to stop me or interrupt me, it's okay. So just to give you a sense of what we are doing. So I'll talk a little bit about this, about exposure to actual violence in post-traumatic stress disorder patients. But we made also a study with virtual violence, people who play violent video games frequently, and also with optimism bias, but this was systematic review. So this is violence exposure worldwide. And so about the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, so people have to experience some kind of trauma, and to be diagnosed, you have to have gone through some kind of trauma that are specific, like actual or threatened death, a serious injury, or sexual violence, by witnessing that in person, or direct exposure when you are the victim, or indirectly by learning that someone close to you have gone through some kind of trauma. Or you can be exposed repeatedly to extremely adverse details of the event, like firefighters, or by being exposed due to your professional duties. And after you consider the kind of trauma that the person has gone through, the person has to show 4 clusters of symptoms related to that trauma. So you have avoidance symptoms, in which you avoid everything that reminds you of the trauma. And hyperarousal, the person is frequently startled and has nightmares and things like that. You have a re-experiencing, so you remember all the time about the details of the events. And this is a cluster of symptoms that appeared in the last version of the DSM, the manual for the diagnosis in psychiatry, that are negative thoughts and feelings. So have a difficulty in experiencing positive emotions. And to investigate PTSD and other psychiatric conditions, one thing, to be a diagnosed, the person has to go through an interview with a psychiatrist. And so the diagnosis is based only in the report that the person gives to the professional. So you certainly are aware that something we are looking for is a biomarker for PTSD and other conditions. And there are many different possible biomarkers for PTSD, including biomarkers in the brain, in the liver, heart, and in many physiological systems. But there is no, until now, there is no one biomarker that has clinical validity or has been confirmed as a biomarker for PTSD. So in 2012, there was this paper from Tanya Jovanovic, who proposed that the impaired safety signal learning may be a biomarker for PTSD. And they performed a conditioning paradigm in which they exposed the patients to a safety cue that signals that you are not going to experience an aversive event like an electric shock. And they conditioned participants also with a fear cue that is an aversive cue that signals that they can experience an electric shock. So after the conditioning with the safety and the danger cue, they exposed participants to both cues together. And what they saw is that the control participants, they attenuate their response to the aversive cue because they have together the safety cue. So they can use the safety cue to attenuate the response to the danger cue. But PTSD patients, they do not attenuate response to the aversive cue, even in the presence of the safety cue. And they made other studies to propose that idea that the patients cannot learn the safety cue, not consciously, but they cannot adapt their reactivity to the safety cue. And the idea is something like that. Consider that you've gone through an assault and it was in the night and you're inside the bus. And so that you form a memory of the traumatic event. And afterwards, every time you're exposed to some kind of signal that reminds you of the event, you have a high reactivity. Well, afterwards, if you do not develop PTSD, you are going to have a bad time when you go inside the bus, but you can learn that, well, you're in another condition, you have someone with you, so there are safety cues to attenuate your reactivity to the danger cues. But the PTSD patients, even though they are exposed to safety cues, they keep on hyperreactivity to the signals of danger. And this is very nice, and there are some people investigating that idea. And by then, we already have made some studies with a safety cue paradigm that is much more naturalistic than a conditioning paradigm. And I'll show you a short introduction to that paradigm. So in our lab, we use mutilated bodies and neutral bodies. And we present those pictures randomly in a control context. So before picture presentation, we say that all the pictures come from the internet and they are real pictures, right? And we also present those stimuli, different stimuli, in a safe context in which we say that pictures are movie production, so they are not real. But the thing is that all the pictures we use are real. So we give them a cue, a safety cue, that signals that these images are not that bad because they are makeup, but actually they are real. And what we observe is what happens to the subjects when they react to the mutilated images in the control context and in the safe context. So those are papers we already published that signals that both autonomic reactivity and brain reactivity shows a pattern of attenuation of response to the mutilated bodies in the safe context, even though the stimuli are real. So you are seeing an extremely strong stimuli that is a mutilated body. But I suggest to you that this stimuli is not that bad. And then people attenuate their brain activity. We saw that with fMRI and EEG, and also their autonomic reactivity. But we investigated skin conductance and electrocardiogram. So this is an example of the results. So here you have the signal from the amygdala. It's from this paper from 2011. And here you have the beta values for the amygdala in the control context in which we say that pictures are real. So you see that there is an increased reactivity for mutilated as compared to neutral. And in the safe context, you have no difference between mutilated and neutral. So it shows that control participants attenuate their brain reactivity in amygdala and also in insula and other regions of the brain when you suggest that the images are movie production. So we decided to use this paradigm to investigate the safety processing in PTSD patients. And this is a paper we published last year with this data. So, and we are continuing to analyze the data. So we presented mutilated and neutral bodies. And this is the context we give them before picture presentation. So we talk about journalistic reporting, and we give them some images to create a context. And we say that, well, the images shown below are real from reports published on the internet. And for the safe context, we give them mutilated bodies and neutral bodies, but we say that pictures, we call them into the idea of the film industry and makeup and so on. So the images presented below are fictitious, the product of various cinematographic techniques. Well, so this is the setup, and we have collected data from 23 control participants who experienced previously via a traumatic event, but they did not develop PTSD. So they are trauma-exposed control participants. And we have also 20 PTSD patients, right? And this is the sociodemographic data. And what we saw, the analysis we performed in this paper was like this. We investigated by means of an analysis of variance, which were the regions of the brain that responded to the valence effect. So for both groups and both contexts, we investigated which are the regions that have a differential activity between mutilated and neutral pictures, okay? And we saw that we have these regions. We extracted the data from these regions and submitted the data to a three-way analysis of variance. So we have the first factor is group, the second is context, real or safe, And the other factor is valence, mutilated and neutral. And we were looking for the regions that presented a three-way interaction. And we corrected the p-value for multiple comparisons by Bonferroni correcting the p-value. And we saw that only the supramarginal gyrus that survived the correction for multiple comparisons. Although we have some interesting regions here, we decided to have a more stringent threshold to analyze the data. So this is the result. And you can see here data from the trauma-exposed controls. And we see that activity in the supramarginal gyrus is higher for mutilated bodies as compared to neutral when we say that pictures are real. And when we induce the safe context, you can see that there is no difference between neutral and mutilated bodies in the supramarginal gyrus. This is an index it's the subtraction of mutilated and neutral. This is the index for the real context, and this is the index for the safe context. So you have a difference between contexts. And here you have the data from the patients. And what we can see is that you maintain the same different activity for mutilated and neutral pictures, both in the real context and in the safe context. And here you have the index that compares mutilated and neutral in the real context here, and mutilated and neutral in the safe context here. So the supramarginal gyrus is revealing to us that PTSD patients do not engage in the safety cues, and they do not attenuate brain reactivity to pictures of aversive pictures, even when they are presented with safety cues. So this was the first study to show evidence in the brain that PTSD patients do not attenuate their reactivity to danger cues in the presence of safety cues. And well, the supramarginal gyrus was a surprise for us. We had no previous idea about finding that region. But what was interesting is that this region processes close threatening objects. It's related to the coordination of defensive actions in watching intense painful stimuli. And when you look at brain reactivity to mutilated bodies as compared to other aversive visual stimuli. And also, this is a region related to peripersonal space, that is a margin of safety around the body. And the peripersonal space, we have regions of the brain that react to stimuli that come close to our body, but did not touch our body. And there is a distance that we call like a bubble that goes around our body that we call the peripersonal defensive space. And this space can be modulated by the context or by your previous experiences. So consider if you're in a safe context, that margin of safety is right close to your skin. So someone can approach you and you do not trigger defensive responses. But if you're in a danger situation, then this margin of safety is really high, big. So someone that is far from you, when this person enters the peripersonal space, you develop or you activate the defensive responses. And so the supramarginal gyrus is involved in the processing of the peripersonal space. And what was interesting is that PTSD patients, they have an increased defensive peripersonal space. So we are revealing that there is some change in the processing of the peripersonal space, and it's related to the symptoms of this condition. And also interesting is that the most frequent traumatic event in our sample was assault with a weapon, sexual abuse, and captivity. So there are traumas in which you have the invasion of the personal space. Well, before talking about this, I would like to also, let me just stop sharing.
Keep on sharing. Keep on sharing. I think it
Sorry?
helps. If you can keep on sharing the slides, I mean, I think it helps.
Okay, it's just that I don't have slides for what I'm talking about now, but I can go there. Something else we are also looking at in our lab is a kind of reaction that is called tonic immobility reaction. I don't know if you already heard about that.
Nope.
No. Okay, so whenever
But
someone experiences,
Fatima,
yeah,
before you go on, if you don't mind, is that because these are very different topics. I mean, as far as I understand. Why the supramarginal gyrus? Because I was thinking on the so the symptomatology, I mean, of post-traumatic stress disorder is that people become hypersensitive to, well, one of the symptoms, the hyperarousal and the hypersensitivity to these memories. I mean, past events that are experienced in cycle. It's like over and over again. In addition to the negative thought, etc. What is it? But all of this is it just because of a subjectively so the wrong weighing of sensitive memories, or is it? I'm just trying to make heads and tails basically of the supramarginal gyrus, because this is a temporal area in particular, and yeah, I know it's related to the perception of peripersonal space. I know it has but from here to surmising, I mean that I mean, sorry, what is the main what is the take-home message for you? It's like, what do you better understand of post-traumatic stress disorder, I mean, based on this?
Yes, well, the supramarginal gyrus is not the most important region here, right? It's just a region that is revealing that patients do not engage in safety cues. So this is a proxy of the symptoms, right? And so, but we had to show that what is the processing that happens in that region. But the supramarginal gyrus is part of a network, probably, that is compromised in PTSD patients. And this work was the first one to show some biological measure of an idea of a possible biomarker. That people beforehand showed that you have an attenuation in peripheral responses, but did not show that in brain reactivity.
Okay, but and how do you interpret the lack of attenuation? So in other words, the fact that there is a loss, that attenuating cues do not yield an effect as they would do on a healthy person about the exposure to specific stimuli. I mean, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I work on neuroscience, but on a vastly different field. But my impression is that this suggests that post-traumatic stress disorder is a very, very complex disorder, because we are just dealing with a small cue, say with a small aspect, I mean, of the post-traumatic stress disorder. But what I would like to know is, how do these people actually, the question is, how does their subjective perception of these stimuli, how is it altered in such a way that they behave the way they do? So in other, I mean, this is what I'm going to, and this is related obviously to the sense of valence, I mean, of the stimuli they are perceiving, and to the relationship they have with their memories, which is obviously a temporal area related thing. But I cannot do complete heads and tails, I mean, of this story. We know that they are not sensitive to attenuating stimuli, so they must be perceiving the memories much more stronger than healthy participants. Definitely. I mean, this would be my hypothesis. Do they have, I mean, and this is actually a question. Do they actually perceive these memories in such a stronger way that they believe they are kind of real over and over again? Because if that's the case, that would explain why they're so oblivious, I mean, to any stimuli, which could potentially attenuate, I mean, it's like that, the stress associated to that memory.
Yes. Well, I
I'm
think
revolving
that
around.
I think that I captured your idea, but if not, please interrupt me. But the processing of safety cues is one aspect of the disease, right? So you have a very complex condition, and there are millions of different patterns of symptom presentation that a PTSD patients can show. So if you think about the AirDoc initiative, in which you describe the mental conditions with systems of biological functioning and psychological functioning, you can consider that you can have multiple aspects, biological aspects and psychological aspects, that can explain some pattern of disease. So I believe that the safety cues processing is one of the aspects of the PTSD patients that is compromised in PTSD patients. And so one thing that I don't like very much in the literature that looks at the attenuation of the processing, the brain processing of stimuli, is that most people think about the prefrontal gyrus, the prefrontal cortex, sorry, modulating the activity of lower regions like the amygdala, right? So it's, and this is what most people think. This is real and it's okay. But I think that there are other situations in which the incoming input can be modulated in that entrance. So I believe that PTSD, differently from not modulating amygdala, of course, it happens and in some situations, but I believe that differently in the PTSD patients, they already have a setup that the income in stimuli is modulated in the first steps of the processing of the stimuli. So it generates an exacerbated response. And but there are a lot of complexities related to that, because the idea that PTSD patients are hyper responsive to everything that reminds trauma, it's like a generalization of the response, right? So everyone looks for that pattern of hyperreactivity in the patients. But this is not always the case. And it's a very complex condition. And something we are looking at also in this data is to look at traumatic experiences in childhood. And what we are seeing is that the patients who have gone through sexual assault in their childhood, they do not present hyperreactivity to danger cues. Actually, they attenuate. They have a blunted reactivity. So one complexity that I think that must be considered when you look at those patients is that you can have different patterns of symptoms. And it makes the analysis of the data very complex. So you don't have something that is present in the same way in every participant, in every patient, because it's a very complex condition. So I believe that this difficulty in engaging in safety cues or in cues in the environment that signal safety, it's an aspect of PTSD, right? And it can be considered maybe as a biological marker, but you can also think that it can be some kind of functioning that could help to understand one aspect of the disease. So I don't think it's, we still have to study it more to understand if it's exclusive to PTSD or it can be something that happens in other diseases also, right? I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I think that it was kind of a comment and a question at the same time. So I think you did. I think there's many questions. I mean, it's like that I could formulate on PTSD.
Maybe as a mathematician, I should ask if in your methodology is anything where topological data analysis could have an impact for some reason. Otherwise, I mean, I don't know very much about brain. I mean, I should have made the remark that I'm a mathematician, I'm a topologist. So now we are collaborating with Ignacy, but he's the neuroscientist, I'm the mathematician. But also somewhere in the background is Aina, and there is another member of our team, but for some reason I do not see her, but I know that she's connected.
Let me just, can you exactly, your question is regarding why the topological,
yes, so just to make because she might not know what is topological data analysis. So they're interested in the kind of images that you have about the brain, because topological data analysis can characterize some images and making an order about, you know, this image is specific of this trauma and not of other trauma, or, you know, of a tumor or a classified tumor. So they're interested in how the study of the images, the kind of images, can be useful in characterizing some specific trauma, you know, like how they're placed in the brain, how they're connected, these different areas. This is the kind of study that they do. They study the images in some ways, you know, like the morphology, the you know, the different areas, how they are connected. So this might be helping in better classify this trauma. You know, you say, you know, some region like are stimulated and some other not. How this region are characteristic of these specific traumas and not, you know, of others. Or you see. So it's a study of the images.
Yeah.
Of the brain.
I don't know how familiar you're with functional fMRI. You have already analyzed.
We have used cardiac fMRI images for diagnosis of cardiomyopathy. This we have done, not with brain images, but with heart images we have worked.
Okay. Well, the thing is that I don't know if I'll be precise in my answer, but the idea is that you have for every voxel, so you have a time course of signal that is the raw signal of the brain, and we are looking at differential activity between conditions. So you have a response to one condition that is mutilated and another one that is neutral pictures. And the thing is that we can look at patterns of differential activity in different parts of the brain. So you can have, you can look at small regions, and you can select regions, and to look at the variability in the signal inside each region. And well, now we have some meta-analysis that were performed, quantitative meta-analysis, that signals to some patterns of some regions of the brain that have differential activity in PTSD patients. So you have like maps of regions of interest that you could look at. And another thing that we do with this data is to use the machine learning methodology. I know you are familiar and you use that. And well, we have a collaboration with Janaína Mourão Miranda. I don't know if you know her. She works with the Pronto tool in SPM in the UCL. So, there is a collaborator of us that is Letícia de Oliveira, who works with Janaína. And so we use machine learning to identify differences in the reactivity of the brain between patients and controls. And we just published last year also a paper with machine learning with this data, in which we observed that the differential activity between mutilated and neutral pictures in the real context is something that can help to detect and to preview the symptomatology of the patients. So that's something, I don't know if I'm close to your question.
No, my question is basically, how can we help? How can we
I
collaborate
think
in
there
this
is,
kind of analysis?
if I may intervene, is like what they have is high dimensional time series of brain activity, and they have some priors as to which areas, typically based on a hypothesis, could be responsible of the difference between traumatic and control images, if I understand this right. And I think one of the aspects which I thought Fatima said was revealing is that every single patient is different. So now the question is whether there is a methodology that could unite or reconcile all of these patients, or basically point out which aspects, of their brains are different through data analysis. I don't know if TDA, or if topological data analysis, could do that, but topological data analysis is appropriate to look for regularities, in the data. So if there is something that machine learning bypasses, it might be detectable. Or characterizable. It could be characterized by a TDA, but obviously this is a hypothesis. I don't know. But I think this is one of the aspects, which is most what I think TDA could bring something in. But obviously,
Okay.
Sorry.
No, okay, sorry.
No, I'm done.
I was thinking also about voxel-based morphometries, some kind of technique in which you look at different anatomical differences in the brains of patients and controls. And we have high resolution anatomical images from the whole sample. I don't know if that could be some measures in which you could use to understand differences. Actually, we have a previous paper with a small sample with VBM in which we investigated differences in the volume of structures in the brain between patients and controls, and we saw some different regions in which you have different volumes, and you can correlate that with some measure like psychometry or even the brain activity. There are some details that you need to be cautious, because what represents a different volume of the brain? It's that a shrinkage, but what does that mean? So, but that's a possibility.
Okay.
Can
Do
I-
you have, sorry.
No, I was thinking about the other related problem that you in the list about these video games. When you do the video games, you put the kids and you see when they play these video games, which area of the brain they activate when they look at the video games. Do you see how this after this, with respect to kids, I don't know if this is possible, they don't play video games, how they react to some situation differently. This is possible to view if this is part of machine learning and images, like, if the brain was trained by violence, and then the kids they've played extensively video games, violent video games, because this could be also related to both things, like how do you treat this?
Actually, that's very interesting, but the video game study, we did not collect brain data. It was a measure of the posture of the participant when they react to pointed guns. And so the signal is the different displacement of the body and heart rate also. Well, another thing we have collected in these patients is the heart rate. So we have the heart response. But I don't know if the one problem we have is the sample size, because we finished the collecting data right before the start of the pandemic. So we had to stop collecting data. And this is a problem, because you lose some patients and you don't have the heart rate, and well, I think you're familiar with that.
Yes, sadly.
Sadly, yeah.
Because I think that would be very interesting study, to see how you train the brain through these video games, and how some area gets more, activated in areas, and after how they, react to, you can show some similar images, or, how, I don't know. I feel this is a very, these video games are a very potential danger to our society, but okay, sorry.
Well, I think one of the very interesting questions, in that respect, is, to just hinge on the hypothesis that the effect of video games could be eventually traumatic.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
could give the same effects as PTSD.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I don't think if we can go that far with hypothesis, but some of the elements, of violent video games, are those of sensitized, those people who play for a long time, because they're so exposed to violence that eventually it becomes like normal life
Exactly.
for them.
Exactly.
And those are maybe changes. There must be changes, in the valence. They associate to those stimuli. So yeah, when they go to the real world, it's so quiet and so normal that there is no violence, and then maybe they create the violences in themselves, or they become violent people. I don't know. These are some, but I think any analysis, as Fatima was suggesting, is that has to be bound to specific hypothesis, because the brain is a very constrained but a very vast place. So if there is any hypothesis, to which other Fatima thinks, it makes sense to look into.
But I once I was in Chicago. We were two Italian, two Greeks, And suddenly we were going by car, and there was someone shooting, and we were in a crossfire. And it was amazing. Like in Italy, they show a lot of movies, American movies, and our reaction of the two Italian was immediately go down. We didn't think. We went down to the carpet. The two Greek were looking around, what's going on, what's going I mean, it was like the reaction, you know, we didn't need to think about it. So was a situation that somehow we indirectly experienced through the movies, you know? So we knew what to do.
That's a cultural bias. That's a cultural bias. I mean, what kind of films do Greeks look at, and which kind of films do Italians look at?
Yeah.
Spaghetti westerns, most likely. So, I mean,
This was,
That's
you know,
very interesting because in this study we performed, we observed that participants who played violent video games frequently, they had an increase in the symptoms of PTSD. It was hyperarousal, and another one, I don't know if it's negative thoughts and feelings, but they had an increase in the symptoms of PTSD.
and they must have also symptoms, I mean, related to addiction, I would bet.
because
Yeah.
it's,
Like those recurrent thoughts, I mean, it's like become an addiction eventually.
Yeah.
And they
exactly.
got, I think it becomes a disorder because actually they become addicted to their own stimuli. I mean, to the feeling that it yielded because it was a very strong impression. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again,
Or
it's
familiar.
speculation, but,
Yeah, or familiar, you know, sometimes it's good. Familiar is good, even if it's bad. You know, like
Yeah.
sometimes familiarity. But it will be interesting to see, you know, how you are training the brain with this, you know. I mean, I know this is
is there
very
any aspect, I mean, for example, is there any element within the time series, the fMRI time series, where you need to phase a classification, for example, because in this case, I mean, it's like it might be interesting actually to look at specific differences from the data itself as a function and by the groups you describe. So in other words, healthy versus PTSD patients are two different groups. Then you have two types of stimuli as well, and so on. And then you have the cues which are familiar that seem to attenuate in one case and not in the other one. What I think TDA could bring is a study, I mean, of the specifics, I mean, of the specific differences in the groups, in the data for each of the groups, and how these projects to brain differences or activity difference is something to be interpreted a posteriori. But yeah, I think that is what straight, I mean, off the shelf TDA could bring on the table, which I think connects to the ideas of structural connectivity and brain differences across participants, and also on how different people, as a function of their higher or lesser development of brain areas, actually respond to trauma in the end.
Something very interesting, I reminded, we are analyzing now a part of the data in which, I don't know if that's something we could think about, but that's something that is going in my mind right now. When you analyze the data, the fMRI data, the pattern of reactivity, we are not looking at the neuronal activity. We are looking at the bold response.
Is it oxygen consumption? Yeah.
Yeah. And it has a long time course, so on and so forth. And in our paradigm, we present pictures for just 200 milliseconds. It's very, very fast.
Yeah.
And it's randomized. And after each picture, you have a period of baseline that can last for 2 seconds, 4 seconds, or 6 seconds. and it's randomized, but the most frequent period is 2 seconds, right?
Okay.
So this is good to be able to have many points in time of the hemodynamic response when you join together the response to multiple pictures, because the signal is going to be collected in different time points of the response. And when we analyze the data, the suggestion of the software is that if you have an event that is shorter than 1 second, you should model that as an event-related response in which you give the program the information that it lasts for 0 seconds, and then it computes a unitary response to that event, right? But the thing is that we thought that, considering that the amygdala is a very important region to the processing of aversive stimuli, maybe the time course of the activation of the amygdala lasts longer than just an event.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe after the picture presentation, you can have activity of the amygdala that extends over time.
In fact,
So,
I think that you should get baseline effects, baseline changes. I mean,
exactly.
on amygdala activity. I mean,
Yeah, and amygdala and the insula. So we are collaborating with a guy, João Sato. I don't know if you know him. He's from University of São Paulo. He works with connectivity, and he has a high background on data analysis. And what we were trying to do is to model the hemodynamic response, not just for 0 seconds, but for 2 seconds, and to investigate what happens. And what we see is that you have a statistic that shows with a better result, the activity, and you reduce the variability of the data because you have more time points, right?
right.
And then we look at also just to the fixation point, to the baseline, and you don't have a statistical difference, but it looks like the amygdala is responding after the picture offset.
I see.
And we were looking at data that could explain that pattern of response. And the thing is that to people with anxiety disorder, what you can see is that their hemodynamic response is different from control participants. And it's interesting because the hemodynamic response for controls, it has a high peak and a decrease. And for the patients, the peak is not very high, but it lasts longer. So it's like my brother. Okay, it was.
So they are less sensitive, but whichever effect they have, they take it for they experience it much longer.
Yes, and the pattern of so if you have a different pattern of response, you need to consider that in the analysis, because otherwise we won't be able to capture the differential reactivity. And so I don't know if that's an aspect that could be considered.
Well, I think that is the yes, definitely is the short answer. I mean, I need to apologize because I need to leave in like 3 or 4 minutes because I have a class to give afterwards. But yes, I mean, this is exactly, I mean, the element of analysis, I mean, that where TDA could be could contribute, because you're talking about differences in shapes of specific time series, which is also that to the advantage of TDA is that fMRI is very slow. I mean, so you have very few photograms. I mean, it's like I don't know, it's once every second, every 2 seconds, every half a second, something like that. So that facilitates the analysis. And yeah, so one potential aspect would be to look into the characteristics, I mean, of these differences. Also, everything is bound to interpretation. So whatever comes out of the analysis is like has to be read out and reinterpreted and possibly falsified eventually with other participants, other data sets, and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a starting point, you know, of interest.
Actually, we have extracted the raw data of the amygdala and insula just to take a flavor of the pattern of response. And it looks like there is some different pattern that is similar to the anxiety disorder patients. But it was just a raw analysis. It was not something in which we can believe. We should interpret it better. But I thank you for the talk.
Yeah, if you want to continue, please go on. It's just that I have a class and I cannot extend much longer. Sorry.
Yes, actually, I also have to go.
She has a bank. She has a thesis defense.
I see.
Oh.
Okay,
But
so
if you want to put down some ideas on an email, I'll happily read it afterwards. And if you want to share the slides you presented, plus the other ones you haven't at the time,
Well, typically, the kind of
can...
things that we could do with topological data analysis are things which are contradictory, that you don't get an answer, and that you need to validate, and then we can just attack the same problem with different methodology and try to reach conclusions which, as you said, can be consistent or contradicting what you have. It's just attacking the same kind of data analysis with a different method. This is what we normally do.
That's nice. That's very interesting. Okay.
Okay. So Fatima
Thanks a lot.
Fatima can send after this article that you say someone that yes. Yes.
Yes, sure. That would be a pleasure. Thank you.
I don't know, Stefanella, what happened, but Aina was present during the full session, but we did not see her. I don't know why.
She's here. I see her without the
yes,
picture.
I'm here, but
you can talk. Excellent.
Yes. Yes, she's here. I've seen her.
Okay.
I've seen her there, but not the face. Okay.
Well, we will definitely meet with Ignazi and maybe talk about that paper and see whether there is any contribution that we can make with our methods. But as I tell you, it's either validate or try to falsify any hypothesis which is so far unconfirmed.
That's nice. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll send you the.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Stefanella, for organizing the meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, Fatima. It was very nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
nice to meet you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.